Okay, everyone, we will be getting started now. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kashaf Iqbal, and welcome to the Richmond Youth Council's Town Hall Speak Truth to Power. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce my fellow Youth Council members and moderators for today. Chair Ashley Davis, Co-Chair Osmar Huerta, Council members Jocelyn Konstawn, Mian Shah, and Sitlali Santiago. I would like to give a welcome to our panelists for today's education discussion. West Contra Costa Unified School District Board member, Mr. Phillips, El Cerrito High School Principal Patricia Crespo, Kennedy High Assistant Principal Helen Burks, and Richmond High's Ethnic Studies teacher Cito Wilson. Another huge welcome to panelists in our local government and law enforcement discussion, Mayor Tom Butt, Council Member Demolis Johnson, and last but not least, Police Chief Bisa French. Our first discussion section will be Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, also known as BIPOC, and education. Our second section will be BIPOC and law enforcement and local government. Next, we'll go over action items / problem areas, following solutions, and closing remarks. We have several goals for today's town hall. We plan on asking questions encompassing the topics of BIPOC and the local education system, as well as BIPOC and local government / law enforcement. We want to facilitate an environment of an ongoing collaboration between our leaders and their constituents by having panelists answer questions from the community. We hope to clear up any misconceptions between officials and the public and allow panelists to gain perspective on the issues concerning citizens throughout Richmond and West Contra Costa Unified School District. And most importantly, we want to build trust in our elected leaders and propose solutions to these problems with aid from the public. And with that, I will pass this on to our first moderator, Jocelyn Konstawn.
Thank you, Kashaf, and thank you everyone for joining us today once again. And before we get started, I want to go over several expectations for all of our panelists today. We expect all parties, including the audience, to remain courteous and respectful of one another. And we will have a zero tolerance policy if anyone shows intentional disrespect. And we have not provided any questions ahead of time in order to obtain the most authentic answers from everyone. And we ask that you remain honest, no matter how brutal it may be. And most importantly, we ask our panelists to be attentive to time, because each panelist has a 2-minute limit per each question. And with that, I would like to dive into my first question. What do you believe is the importance of developing an anti-racism curriculum throughout the West Contra Costa Unified School District? And I'd like to direct that first to board member, Mr. Phillips.
There we go. I want to start by saying thank you very much for inviting me here to speak with you all today. It is extremely important that we have an anti-racist curriculum in our district. It's important for the students of color because we want them to be able to thrive and be in a place where they feel safe and supported. And all of those things, feeling safe and supported, allow you to learn because you have to be in the right space to be able to get the things that you need academically. But it's also important for our white students as well, because we live in a society where we're all together and where we all have to move forward together, as one. And I believe that our local schools are really the training grounds for us to be able to move forward together in unity, as a society. So just overall, it is extremely important. It is important for our youth, regardless of what their color is. And it's also important for our educators because, as we have adults working with our children, and you have to excuse me, I think anybody from 1 to 25 is a child, but, as we have people working, with our children, we want to make sure that they're seeing them for who they are, not for stereotypes, not for biases that they may bring to the table. Because when you see them for other than who they are, you don't serve them properly. You serve them like they're something other than, or so like they are less than, which they're not. So it's important for the entire school community, and it's something that we have to have. So thank you.
Thank you. And I would now like to direct that to Ms. Burks.
Thank you. I think it's a really important question. I want to just underline so much of what Mr. Phillips said. I also think it's important that people recognize that we're not starting with neutral, right? It's not about, oh, we need an anti-racist curriculum as opposed to this neutral one we have now. We need an anti-racist curriculum because what we have right now is a racist curriculum. If you look at what its function is, what its purpose is, and you can go so deep into the history of schooling and the history of education with this, and I want to be tight to your question. But I think that is the piece and the recognition that there must be, right, in order to understand the importance. And I think there's a few different reasons why I feel that it's especially vital. Probably the one that for me goes deepest is because I believe schools and the adults that students are around have a profound influence in how students begin to see themselves. Right? They spend a tremendous amount of time with us. And so I think that formation of identity and how they see themselves is crucial. It's part of why I think having educators of color is so crucial when you have the person who is giving this knowledge and is the authority figure in the room. So I think formation of identity, it's important for all students, regardless of their background. I, as a white female, really wish that I had learned a lot more history that was true and broad and encompassing than what I learned, right? It made some huge difference in how I see the world and how I govern my actions. I also think it's important for the important relationships that there need to be within schools in order for students to be in a place where they're willing to be vulnerable and when they're able to have that kind of deep, amazing bond that we know leads to like greater investigation. There has to be an honest relationship. And I think our teaching force is very white in a lot of ways, while our students are not. So I think that honesty and relationship, I think an anti-racist curriculum does some of the work of getting us there to where we can have authentic change moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Burks. And I would now like to direct that to Mr. Wilson.
Well, first and foremost, it's very important because I don't think, at least as long as I've been in education, that educators actually sat around the table and had conversations about whether or not the curriculum is anti-racist. I mean, I think initially the curriculum is racist. I mean, it's a racism curriculum. So in order to inject anti-racism, that is very important to our students. 9 times out of 10, students are exposed to ethnic studies programs when they get to college. So I don't see anything wrong with even exposing the students to that on the elementary, middle school, and definitely on the high school level. So as far as words that have been shared in terms of like, this is mandated by the state, why does it have to be the focus on this? No, this is what makes the world go round. This is how you learn about other cultures and different people. And it kind of gives you that foundation when you get out into the real world. Because students want to think like, okay, what did high school prepare me for? And sometimes, at least a lot of my former students think, well, I wasn't prepared. And it's the little things like an anti-racist curriculum is part of that preparation as to how to respect other cultures, learn about different parts of their own culture that they want to wear of, and having the support and the faculty to teach and share and educate students with this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I think that's a very thoughtful response, all of you. And I would now like to direct this to Ms. Crespo.
Thank you. I believe that implementing an anti-racist curriculum is of the utmost importance, especially now. We actually at El Cerrito just started our ethnic studies this year, even though the district hasn't mandated it yet, because that's how important I believe it is. But I think that in society, we're actually at a turning point. We're at a fork in the road. And we have the opportunity to begin to disrupt and really revolutionize the way that we see our students and people of color. I believe that our anti-racist curriculum will teach our young people how to break free from institutionalized racism. I think of Paulo Freire, who actually believes that education should teach the masses how it is that we're caged, how it is that we're used by the wealthy to basically make them wealthier. And that's what I actually believe an anti-racist curriculum should encompass, is how we are at the mercy of wealthier beings, institutions out there. But I see this as the moment to create change and revolutionize what we're doing. And several of the other speakers stated that the curriculum that we have is racist. That's because K-12 public education is one of the most racist institutions that exists, as we can see by decades and decades of same data that our Black and brown kids graduate at lower rates, don't go to college, don't graduate from college, drop out. And it still goes on. So now is the time to begin the change by educating all of you, and you will all be running the world very soon. That's it.
Thank you all. And I want to ask another follow-up question to that question. What steps have each of you taken in order to further your view to promote diversity within school curriculum? I'd like to give this first to Mr. Wilson.
So the way I've handled it specifically this year with my African American literature class and creative writing class is just look at material that students have not been exposed to. So think in terms of, like, for example, African American authors, Black authors. So you've been exposed to Frederick Douglass. Okay, how many have been exposed to James Baldwin on a high school level? How many have been exposed to Nikki Giovanni on a high school level? Alice Walker on a high school level? Those are the type of, and there's many more authors. But usually what may have happened is like Frederick Douglass, maybe Lorraine Hansberry, if they read A Raise in the Sun, possibly Zora Neale Hurston, if they read Their Eyes Are Watching God. And that may be it. Like maybe not even Toni Morrison, and some of you in our current authors. I mean, there's a whole slew of Black authors right now that are writing young adult novels that are popular as well. So I think my first step was just think about what hasn't been taught, what hasn't been exposed to students, to all students, because I have a mixed group of students in my classes. So that's so my number one thing is just like not go with the obvious. Maybe hit the obvious, but then go deeper and find, okay, what are you not aware of? And that's not taught in other classes.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And now Mr. Board Member, Mr. Phillips.
So I want to start by giving a little context, because what we're talking about is curriculum and how we get our curriculum. And I think it's very necessary to just kind of step back a little bit and paint a broader picture of how this actually works. So we have curriculum committees where teachers, principals come forward and present to the school board curriculum, whether it's ethnic studies curriculum, math curriculum, English, whatever it may be. The school board then adopts that curriculum. And so the curriculum that we're talking about right now, that is all curriculum that has funneled up through this teacher process that I'm describing right now, and then has been ultimately adopted by the school board. So ethnic studies courses that we have, those are courses that were approved by the school board. Black literature courses like Mr. Wilson is talking about, those books are books that were approved by the school board. So I'm trying to give you some context and paint a broader picture for you. But that said, the school board does need to do a lot more. I really do believe we need an ethnic studies department in our district to make this entire thing something that is district-wide, and that it is mandated because we don't have necessarily Patty Crespo at every single school, and I really do appreciate her for what she has done. But that said, one of the things that I would like to do moving forward in the next term is have the school board focus much more closely on the curriculum aspect and have a robust academic subcommittee of the school board that is able to spend some in-depth time looking at these things so we can move the ball forward a lot further than we already have.
Thank you very much, Board Member Phillips. And I completely agree that before we even deal with any issues, the first thing to tackle is curriculum, and that starts with having a department dedicated completely to curriculum. And I'd like to direct the question to now Ms. Burks.
Thank you. I'll start by saying I love this idea of the ethnic studies, like focused department, people working on that, because I think multiple of the schools are trying things, but they're all pretty different from each other. And while I recognize like schools are different, but I think we could be strengthened a lot more if we had a chance to come together about a month and a half ago with the different high schools and talk about where we are currently with ethnic studies and talk about like looking forward. But I think that is deeply important work. And for myself, I started out as a teacher in this district. I taught at El Cerrito High, I taught science. And for me, where I got a lot of my ideas about diversifying curriculum were from outside workshops that I opted in to go to, right? Going for the Teachers for Social Justice conference or it was a Facing History in Ourselves conference where I got a lot of good material that then I turned into like a eugenics, a science and race, scientific racism unit to look into like what the impacts had been. And I think the more we can have that within our school district so that it's tightly relevant and tied to our community, the stronger we'll be. I think honestly, I think the question was, how have I learned about diversity or how have I experienced it? A lot of it has been through a ton of listening and a lot of reading. And I think that when you listen to students, it's a deep craving and it doesn't take long to get there in a conversation. If you were to ask a kid, like, what do you think of the curriculum you have in school? Like, as someone who works around young people all day, if I hadn't picked up on that, that's a problem, right? Like, and so we've done some really intentional work at Kennedy that I'm proud of. And I'm really proud of a group of teachers that have come together to really listen to students. They interviewed students about what they wanted to see in all these different areas. We created videos and listened to it as a staff. Now all of our 9th graders are taking ethnic studies as their freshman history class. So there's been like a step-by-step thing where the more hands we have on, the faster I think this work goes. But we really need to do this work together.
Thank you, Ms. Burks. And I'd also like to make a comment. I also agree that helping each other and working towards resolutions is really a learning process when it comes to listening to what other students think. And thank you for that. And I'd like to direct this now to Ms. Crespo.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Phillips. That was very sweet. I actually think at El Cerrito, I'm really trying to continue to push our mindsets, opening our mindsets as teachers, because if we don't believe that our students, all of our students, but in particular our students of color can succeed, then we're not going to do the work. That being said, we're beginning curriculum audits within our departments because it is important that every department, our math, science, English, history, that we really see what are we reading? What are our kids reading, right? Is it all by the typical white canon? There were other people present when all of these atrocities were happening. And so it's important that our students are exposed to that. We've started, like I said, our ethnic studies courses this year for all of our 9th graders, but I'm working with Dr. Lori Watson, who's going to come in next year and work with our staff on continuing to focus on our unconscious biases and how that impacts the way we see students. Another thing that goes with curriculum is how we grade. So we've started to talk about grading because if we actually shared grade data with our staff today on the number of Ds and Fs that our white students are getting versus our Black students. And it's astonishing and sad, but it's everywhere. It's not just El Cerrito. This is happening nationwide, California-wide. And those are tough conversations and many people feel uncomfortable, but it's that we all have to feel uncomfortable in order to learn and grow. It's like flexing a muscle, right? It'll hurt, but then you'll get stronger and the muscle will get bigger. I love the idea of an ethics studies department or like a BIPOC student success department, because this should be happening at every single school. And we need to guarantee that it's happening at every single school, because every single one of our children in the district, white, Black, brown, all deserve to be exposed to this, because this is our world now. We have a beautifully diverse, language-rich world, and students need to be able to see themselves in their curriculum, and curriculum needs to be able to speak to them so that they're engaged in it and they actually learn from it. So that to me is my goal by doing our curriculum audits.
Thank you so much for that response, Ms. Crespo. And I agree that ethnic studies curriculum is something that needs to be like not only at El Cerrito, but throughout every single school in the West Contra Costa Unified School District. And I'm about to move onto the Q&A portion of this section. But before that, I would like to ask each and all of you, describe the current state of the West Contra Unified School District in 3 words. I'd like to give that first to Mr. Wilson.
Wow, 3. Time to work.
Thank you. I'd like to give that next to Ms. Burks.
For this. Say urgently failing forward.
Thank you for your honesty, Ms. Burks. And I'd like to direct that next to Ms. Crespo.
At a crossroads.
Thank you, Ms. Crespo. And now I'd like to direct that to board member, Mr. Phillips.
Can I have like 4 words? So the first word that came to my mind was underperforming. That's the very first word that came to my mind, sadly. But can do better. I'm just gonna say that's a phrase, right? So that's 2, but it's underperforming, but can do much better. Ms. Crespo is right. We're at a crossroads, but I'm really hopeful about the future of this district. We're starting the superintendent search process to bring some new energy in here. We have almost an entirely new school board coming on. That board includes teachers, it includes parents, it includes people with ELD experience where we're dropping the ball. I mean, there is a lot for us to look forward to. So I would cap all of that with hope, but right now in its current state, we are underperforming.
Thank you, board member, Mr. Phillips. And I completely agree with all of you that there's a lot to be done. And I want to move on to the Q&A section, and I would like to give audience members time, 30 seconds, to type any questions you want to the panelists. This is your time to type it now.
Okay, so the first question, what has the effect of the Black Lives Matter protests been on conversations around school safety and policing?
Is that open to any of us or?
Yeah, anyone can answer.
Thank you. I'll answer that. It's been a major shift in the intensity, I would say, of people's gaze and focus on the issue. For instance, I feel like, so the district this year on Fridays, every Friday morning, we've been having these race and equity PDs, right? And something that was named in the very beginning was that the focus was on our Black students' experience. And there was a very, and I'll be honest, I think in the past, the district has not been so blunt just about saying we're focusing on Black students. There's been the resolution, but there's been, whether you call it a white people hesitance, which I know very well, this distancing or this like, I'm going to do it wrong. I feel like right now I see a lot more rawness and people having the conversation about what's best for our Black students. And in particular, I know over the summer that pushed a lot of conversation about what does safety look like in schools as a result of this? What is the experience of all of our students? Do they feel safe in our schools? What is the proper role of police in schools? In what ways are the adults, the staff on schools, policing students, right, without the badge? So I think it's multi-layered, the level of introspection and the urgency that's been placed on it. It's not a new thing, right? Back a couple of years ago when we were first doing the positive school climate resolution, there originally was in there a desire to have like school resource officers removed from schools. So it's not new ideas, but I think that people's awareness was heightened. And I think that in general, young people spoke out, spoke loudly, spoke boldly, and adults listened to an extent. We got a lot of growing to do as the adults. But yeah, I think this is a topic I'm really passionate about. It's a topic that I've seen play out really differently from when I was at El Cerrito High than when I'm at Kennedy High. So I think that there's a lot for us to talk about safety within our district and what it looks like. And it's also something where I, as someone who's not from this neighborhood and from the district, I have all these ideas, right, and thoughts, but it is my responsibility as someone who serves the community to be really tightly tied in to what makes the community feel safe. So that's just, I think, where that has to be our directioning through it.
I'll take a crack at this one. So there has been, I'll start with the school resource officers. There has been a push, I won't say by the entire community, but by a segment of the community to remove school resource officers from the district for a while. And I think what happened is, if you're specifically asking about the effect of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think what happened when George Floyd was murdered, and it was a murder, there was this crescendo, not just across America, but here as well. And that led to us passing as a school board Black Lives Matter resolution. In that resolution, the board kind of took a U-turn and actually end up addressing the school resource officer issue. And a motion was passed that essentially said that school resource officers, and those are people who are actual police officers, would not, let me be very specific. The motion was very specific. It said full-time armed law enforcement officers would not be, in the school. And then that program essentially was defunded for the school year, and that money was put into the past budget, which is the program budget for African American student achievement. Now, what I want to say, though, it's 30 seconds. This is a really big question. What I want to say, though, is that work still is not done, because the truth is, when that resolution was passed, there really wasn't a plan put in place to keep kids safe at school. It was, I got 10 seconds. I'm going to figure out a way to talk about this later at some other time, or if you give me time later, I will. But there's so much more to this question, and it's not a 2-minute answer, because that issue of the SROs alone, I'm just being frank with you right now, we don't have a plan in place for when we go back to school around safety. We do have the campus security officers, the CSOs. I know some people believe that those positions were eliminated, but they weren't. So we do still have security, and we can't keep our campuses secure without it. But that SRO issue is going to come back. And so maybe at some point you want to have a longer conversation about that.
I'd like to say that I think that it's really actually triggered a lot of conversation about how students feel policed at school, not only by SROs, but when we look at some of our schools, they have no windows. I mean, really, they may seem like another form of prison. And when we talk about this fear of creating a K, like a pipeline to prison, it's how we end up really addressing our students and the community that we create for our students. If we are afraid of our kids, if we see them as hostile or whatever it might be, then why would our kids believe that they can do so much more and rise to the occasion? I wish that the money that was taken, because when we talk about money, it's a lot of money, that if it came back to our school sites, I'd want to invest it within an academic lens. And for example, counselors, if we really want to ensure that our kids are succeeding, they need more counselors. The national counseling standards is 250 to 1. The average across the country is about 430 students per counselor. Our students need to be able to meet with their counselors not once a year or once a semester, but several times a year to plan their trajectory to college, to know what courses they can take at the community college or AP courses to guide them as far as choosing classes on campus that will boost their GPA, that they're good at because of the PSAT results. That's what we need the capacity to provide a solid academic standing for our kids on campus. And so I hope that as this money is being repurposed, that it goes back into academics, like on site, right? I think it's a resource that was taken from the sites. And so where is that resource being returned to serve our children?
Okay, Board Member Phillips, I actually just wanted to quickly mention that you said you wanted to talk a little bit more about on the situation. You'll get time for that during the solution section. So just keep those in hand. Okay, so the second question is from Sean. He says, what is your theory for why Black/brown students are performing less well than others? And once again, this is a free-for-all, so anyone who wants to answer, go right ahead.
I'll go ahead and take this one. So you got to think about representation. You got to think about representation in the curriculum. You got to think about representation in the books that students read, and particularly towards Black and brown students. If they don't see themselves, there may be a bit of discouragement, specifically for Black students, if they don't feel that they're represented on campus or in class or not heard or don't have a chance to express themselves and speak their minds, use their voice, then that might be some type of like just, it's not going to be they're going to be backed in a corner, so to speak. So I think it's more of less something that there may be an interest in and not just someone force feeding, well, you have to do this, you have to do this. Because 9 times out of 10, what does the student ask? Why are we doing this? If you have an actual answer, like the real why, not because, well, this is the book you have to read because I read it. But if you actually tell the truth, then you may get more buy-in. So I think the part of the discouragement may be just the material in class. It also just may be how students are approached. I mean, it can be something as simple as how a educator relates to a specific student, a specific group of students. It can also be, there's a lot of factors into that. It could be like I'm hearing a lot of like situations where students are feeling there's a lot of work on distance learning, that where they're like, it's piling up. And I'm hearing, stories about like teachers are cramming like an hour and a half worth of work into 55 minutes. And then they have their other classes too. And then, they may have to work or they may have to, family obligations and whatnot too. So I think with that, lens, and just the assumption that they cannot perform, I think that all just weighs everyone down.
I think that 400 plus years of oppression only, unfortunately, causes us to be born behind, right? Like I remember growing up and in an English class, one of my colleagues said, oh, my mom helped me with my essay. And I'm like, what? My mom doesn't even speak English, man. How awesome would it have been to have my mom help me with my essay? But I, had to work twice as hard on it. So we're already starting with a disadvantage. We're starting behind. And I think that we are not given the chance to even level out, much less catch up and advance, because the K-12 system was created to control, right? To control young kids, to control and create great workers. That's what unfortunately our K-12 system was created to do. And if you think about it, a lot of institutions still teach very much the same way. We lecture and whatever, not involve kids or ask really for their feedback. Not all teachers do this, but we are stagnant as far as growth. I oftentimes tell our staff that we need to evolve, otherwise we're going to become extinct. And many of us are becoming extinct, and we're still in education, and that's a detriment to our children, especially our children of color. And I agree that engagement also has to happen. If they don't see themselves in what they're learning, why does it matter? This used to be Mexico. There's so much to be able to discuss with our children and make them feel like they're part of it and have a voice in it as well. I love this ethnic studies department. Imagine if our kids could tell us what they would love to learn about, right? Who they would love to read. Wow.
Okay, that is the end of the Q&A for the audience. I would just like to say thank you so much to the panelists. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Crespo, Board Member Phillips, Ms. Burks, and Mr. Wilson. We will now be moving on to our next discussion on law enforcement and local government with our next moderator, Admar Huerta.
Hello, panelists. How are you? I'm going to ask you to get on screen now. Hello. I would just like to thank all of you for showing up today. Councilman Johnson, Mayor Butt, and Chief Bisa French. Thank you all so much for coming to our town hall and discussing questions that we have about BIPOC and local law enforcement, as well as our local government. So I'm just going to launch in right to the first question, and I'm going to direct this at Police Chief French. Do you think that the racial makeup of a community's police department should be similar to the racial makeup of the community it serves, or is this unnecessary?
So first, I just want to thank you all for inviting me tonight and allowing me to speak. To your question, I think that it is important that there's representation. It's not always possible to have the exact representation of the community in the department, because we want to make sure that we hire we keep a staff that's going to be able to respond to the community. So we try to hire the best people for the job. But I do think that it is important to have people that understand the cultures within our city. For instance, I have had 2 meetings in the last 2 weeks with members from the Latino community who says, we want more Spanish speaking officers. And I get that. Our community is, the Latino community has climbed, and we're like 40-something% in Latino. So yes, we need officers that speak Spanish because we need to be able to communicate with members of our community. So I think that is very helpful to have people that, know the culture, and specifically people from the community, because Richmond is unique and there's a lot of unique neighborhoods. There's people that have been here generations. And so, to understand that and to be able to relate and have those, it makes it easier to communicate with folks that you already know because you're from here. I grew up in the area, so I know a lot of people, in Richmond. I grew up in San Pablo and have lived in this area, went to West Contra Costa Unified School District schools. So it's easier because I know so many people, and that's always helped me with my position as an officer and as I've gone through the ranks.
Well, thank you so much for your answer, Ms. Bisa French. I would also just like to take the moment to congratulate you so much for becoming the first Black woman police chief in Northern California. That is an amazing accomplishment. And to know that, like, someone who, as you said, just went through the entire Richmond system their entire life, it's really nice to know that we have someone who actually represents our community in that position. And I would like to open now this question up to Councilman Johnson and Mayor Butt, whichever one of you would like to answer it. Do you believe that the racial makeup of our community's police department should be equal or similar to that racial community it serves?
Yeah, I'll go with that. You know, I agree with Chief French. It's not always possible to get a one-on-one ratio because the makeup of, you know, the demographics of Richmond continues to change, and over the last few years it's changed rapidly, and typically police officers you know, will work 20 or 30 years. So you know, it's not something you can turn around overnight. It's a good long-term goal, but it's something that you can't always achieve. You just you've kind of got to try to look ahead and see where things are going.
Yes, and once again, thank you to the Richmond Youth Council for organizing and inviting me to this panel. And I completely agree with Chief French. You know, I do believe that it's important to make sure that our police department looks like our community. And although there are difficulties in you know, making sure that happens, I do want to, you know, also congratulate the chief as well as the Richmond Police Department on their recruitment efforts with the Explorers. You know, sometimes people try to go elsewhere to find officers to work in our city, whereas our police officers are offering career opportunities and offering those chances to people right here in the city of Richmond, which will, you know, in time, you know, most definitely make sure that our police department looks like our city, and also have people from our city. So that's something else I wanted to lift up as well.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to this one, again, open to any of our panelists that would like to answer it. What does the future of policing in Richmond look like, and how exactly will the youth be involved in that?
I'll start. So I think the youth have a huge part in what policing looks like here in Richmond, because the youth are our future, and we have to invest in them. We want our youth here in Richmond to be interested in the field of law enforcement and to join our force. I think Councilmember Johnson mentioned that, you know, through our Explorer program, those are Richmond kids that we have, you know, put through our Explorer program. And then we actually hire them on as cadets so they could get another feel of law enforcement to make sure it's the right fit for them and that they like it. And then we try to hire them on as officers. And we've done that in many different instances. And that's how we've actually increased our Latino officer population in our department. But as far as the future of what does law enforcement in Richmond look like, I think it's really those partnerships that we have with the community, that we work together to really solve and prevent crime here in the city of Richmond. And we can't do it alone as police officers. We have to have that community involvement. But in order to have that community involvement, we have to have the trust. And so I think that there's some relationship and trust building that we have to continue to do so that we can work together and that we can actually talk through what does our community actually want. And those are the conversations we're having right now as we talk about reform. What does, you know, our community want? Do they want us to enforce certain types of low-level crimes, or do they not? And I think that those conversations are important, and I'm looking forward to what comes out of them.
So I'm going to make a very bold statement, and I hope we're recording. I see we're recording this. Richmond is going to lead the nation in policing once again. You know, when the model of community policing first hit the scene in the early 2000s, Chief Magnus, he did a great job at, you know, bringing the department up to, you know, modern standards. And I think Chief French is really going to take off, you know, in these next few months. You know, we have the Reimagining Commission that we just put together. I believe there's about 21 members on there. I know myself personally, to even speak more specifically to your question, nominated a member of Richmond Revolution who is a member, a youth. And then Councilmember J.L. Myrick has an agenda item coming up this Tuesday that will actually grant more oversight to the Community Police Review Commission. And so, we're always encouraging youth as well as other citizens to go out for those commissions and, have a larger voice. But, once again, I'll make the statement, Richmond is going to lead the nation in terms of policing. As Chief French mentioned, in terms of our community members coming together with our officers and determining which crimes we want, how are we going to define crime? How are we going to define public safety? And I know that that's most definitely going to serve as a model for the rest of the nation, if not the world.
Young people have been on the front lines for years of protests over issues with police departments. Fortunately, most of them have been somewhere else besides Richmond, but young people they've been out front on this. And one of my goals as mayor is to try to get more young people involved in positions where they can actually learn more and have influence over what police do. Chief French talked about explorers, and that's one opportunity. If young people, are really interested in law enforcement and want to know how it works and what they can do to change it, there's no better program than the Explorer program, to get involved in it. Now, one of the few things that I have the power to do as mayor is to appoint people to boards and commissions. And I would love to appoint a young person to the police commission. I've really tried hard to recruit somebody, and it's not been easy. But we have vacancies come up all the time, not just the police commission, but all of our boards and commissions. So if there are young people out there who really want to get into how a city works and not only learn about it, but have some influence over it, get in touch with me, get in touch with the mayor's office, and we'll find a board or commission for you to sit on. There's no age limit. The only age limit I'm aware of is the what do they call it, the commission on aging, and you have to be 55 or older to sit on that. So young people, don't bother to apply for that. You've got a few years left. But any other board or commission, it's fair game. Get a hold of me or the mayor's office, and we'll find a place for you.
All right. So my next question, again, open for all of you. So just what steps are each of you taking individually and as the mayor, city council member, and chief of police to talk with our youth and just take initiative with trying to provide these opportunities for us and trying to find a seat at the table of power, regardless of what you have just stated within any current programs. What is your vision for bringing together the youth of Richmond?
So even before I was elected to the Richmond City Council and just as an involved community member, I saw myself at the basis of being like a person who connects individuals to resources and to other individuals that can help further either organizational goals or their personal goals. So for me, I introduced individuals who may be of like minds or like organizations, so that way they can partner and move forward together. Try to, as Mayor Butt mentioned, try to encourage young people to join the boards and commissions. And as I mentioned earlier, nominate a few myself for boards and commissions. But my overall vision for young people in Richmond is to play just as an active role as everyone else plays in Richmond. In what you see in a lot of cities, and I'm not going to make Richmond sound like a special case, is the youth voice are usually listened to for a certain amount of time, and then it's like, okay, now we're going to make the real decisions. And what I want to see in Richmond is the youth having the same amount of power and the same voice at the table as everyone else, because you guys are a serious voting block and a serious constituency, and you deserve to have your views represented on the school board as well as in the city that you live in. And as I said before, if I can be a resource of any type, please let me know, whether that be a board or a commission or an individual that you would like to know, who I wouldn't mind cold calling or reaching out to and connecting you to.
Thank you so much to both Councilman Johnson and Mayor Butt, for both of you reaching out your personal resources to help motivate any young person across the city to pursue any goal they have. This question now I would like to direct it to either Chief French or Mayor Butt. Just what steps are you individually taking to ensure that the youth have a seat of power at the table?
Well, as a young person, by far the most important thing to do is to get an education. There are things you can do without an education, but mostly you need an education to do anything that's going to be really important in this world. And so that's the most important thing. Now, one of probably the most important project I've ever worked on as mayor is getting the Richmond Promise program started. The Richmond Promise program provides a scholarship that is worth at least $6,000 for every high school graduate who's a Richmond resident or North Richmond resident. And it's not so much the $6,000 or the scholarship, but it's part of a program to build a college-going culture with kids. And so there are parts of that program that help prepare kids to believe that, yes, they can go to college, and to try to bring them along and help them with their applications and help them with their finance applications and that kind of thing. So I think that's the most important thing we can do for young people. And the program we have in Richmond, by the way, is the highest funded program in the state of California. There are promise programs around the country, and there are, I don't know, maybe a half dozen or a dozen in California. There's one in Oakland, Long Beach, some other cities. But Richmond has more funding in the bank than any program in California. And we're trying to build on that. So if you're a young person and you want to go to college and you're worried about how you're going to pay for it or how it's going to work out, contact the Richmond Promise people who are part of the city of Richmond and get involved in that. That's the key to your future.
Thank you, Mayor Butt. Ms. French, would you like to answer now?
Yes, thank you. So I see this as multiple parts. To me, there's the recruitment, because we want to, try to recruit people into our field and especially from our community. I also see as there's an educational component to it where we're working on having some forums and know your rights. There's several different things we have in the pipeline in terms of town hall meetings and engaging with youth. Like one of the things that we're going to be starting really soon is these really short social media conversations with a police officer where we want to engage young people specifically to have a conversation, a really short 5 to 10 minute max conversation about a lot of topics that are going on right now, so that we could get your perspective and take that perspective into consideration when we're making policies and, changing things. But I also see there's a lot of work that we're doing in prevention and intervention. So we started a diversion program within the police department in partnership with PAL. And we also have a diversion program with RISE, because we don't want to see young people going into the criminal justice system. So we're trying to look for additional avenues to, hold people accountable, but, not give them a record. So through these 2 different diversion programs, we're allowing young people to get involved differently with their community, so we can educate them, try to get them on the right path so they don't go down the wrong path. To me, investing in the youth is that's what we have to do as a city, because if we don't, we're going to continue on this legacy of a city that has a lot of crime issues. And if we invest in our youth, we can really intervene and change that.
Thank you all so much for your responses. We are going to be moving to the portion of our section where we allow our audience members to directly ask you questions. So audience members, if you would like, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. And now I'm going to pass it off to Mian to do this for us.
So now we're just going to be moving on. Anybody can just ask questions in the chat and I'll be saying them out loud. And anybody, if Chief French or anybody wants to answer the questions, they're free to answer the questions.
If there are no questions asked at the moment, I'd just like to take the panelists' time to continue asking some questions that we have formulated for you guys. So are you guys, mayor, city council, law enforcement, are there any programs or incentives in place right now to try and mend these broken relationships between these avenues of power and their constituents? And this is open for anyone to answer.
I'm not sure of particular programs, but we are having a lot of conversations, and I think conversations are key. That's the only way we're going to, start the healing process, is to, talk about what wrongs have been done in Richmond, specifically with youth. I can say that I've been working on this project called Reducing Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Juvenile Justice System, with a lot of different leaders within the, from somebody from the school district, the district attorney, the public defender. There's a bunch of us that are working on a project that is sponsored by Georgetown University, so that we can make recommendations to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system, specifically around school discipline and SROs. I know we don't have SROs on campus anymore, but how we can make sure that what we have in place here in Richmond, that's more the county for this particular program, isn't contributing to the school to prison pipeline and putting young kids of color into the juvenile justice system. So that's one program I've been working on.
And I'd also like to add two other departments that the city has, or two other resources that the city has, and that's the Office of Neighborhood Safety as well as the Family Justice Center. The Office of Neighborhood Safety, known as ONS, does a great job at, getting youth who are on the verge of, as Chief French mentioned, going on the wrong path, and helping them have better interactions with different institutions, whether that be government institutions, employment institutions, and really helping them set up a better life for themselves. And then also the Family Justice Center, where they help women who have been victims of sexual assault. They also women who have been victims of human trafficking, child abuse, and different types of services to help individuals who have been through those types of traumas. Those services can be received at the Family Justice Center. So I just also wanted to lift up ONS and the Family Justice Center.
I think having town hall meetings like this is one of the most important things that we can do. I think that there are a lot of misunderstandings between people of different generations about about how the city's organized, how it works, how it's financed, what the priorities are, what the city council does, what the police chief does, what the city manager does, that kind of thing. And I think the more we can get everybody to understand how all the moving parts come together and how they work, I think we'll get closer to solutions. I know there are a lot of upset young people about the police department or other things in the city. I get a lot of communication from them. Back several months ago, I got literally thousands of emails, not all from Richmond, but a lot from Richmond. A lot of them from young people, who were asking us to defund the police department. And I get it. I get it. They're upset. They've got issues, and I think that we need to find solutions that we work through together. I think just yelling at each other is not going to solve problems. We've got to communicate. And I think the more we have things like this town hall, the better off we are.
Okay, so we got questions now. The first question, which is directed to everybody: what is being done by the city to put in place programs that will assist youth with employments? Anybody's free to answer the question.
Well, I could start with what we're doing in the police department, and I already talked about it. Specifically for the police department, we're trying to get young people in as explorers, and then get them in positions as cadets. And then actually, I mean, there's lots of different positions as in the police department. You don't have to be a police officer. We need dispatchers, jailers, like there's different positions. And so the main thing is getting young people in and connected very early. And that's why we encourage young people to join our Explorer program, because then you get a sense of what it's like in the police department, and to see the different functions, to see if it's a place that you would like to have a career. This is not just a job, it's a career. And so we try to bring people in very young to get exposed.
One thing that the city of Richmond has, the community services department partners with different businesses and organizations during the summertime to hire students for summer jobs. And, this is something that we can most definitely look into. With COVID, all of the funding is kind of like wacky, but moving forward, I think it is most definitely a lot of value in looking to make this a year-round program. Summer jobs are great, but a lot of our students, need jobs year-round. And so one thing we do have currently that we can build upon is the summer youth employment program that the community services department administers.
And I'll add that Richmond has one of the most successful job training programs in the whole country, and that's the Youth Build and the Richmond Build program. And this Richmond Build program primarily trains people for the construction industry, and they work with unions and the union apprenticeship program. And one story I like to tell is this now is about, it's maybe a year and a half ago or so now, but every time they did a Richmond Build class, they would invite people to come down to the graduation ceremony, and sometimes they'd invite me to come down and say a few words and that kind of thing. So I was all set up to go to this graduation ceremony, and then I got a phone call, and they said we've had to cancel it. And I said, why? And they said everybody's got a job, they got to go to work. And that's the kind of success stories that I want to see. When you got to cancel out graduation because people have already been hired and they're working, that's success. And these are, if you're interested in the construction industry, these are great programs to get into.
Okay, we have one more question. And the question is, again, open for anybody. There are youth that don't trust the police. How is the Richmond Police Department working on breaking those barriers beside working with RICE and RPAL?
All right, so we work with a lot of different community-based organizations, and thank you for that question, Yeni. So in addition to RISE and RPAL, we're in conversations with RISE to actually have conversations with the youth that attend so that we can try to break some of those barriers. But we've worked with like Bay Area peacekeepers, where some at-risk youth, we can work with them and really spend time with them on a non-enforcement level. And that's the key. We have to be able to have some communication where it's not enforcement, where we're talking, we're answering questions, because a lot of times things are just there's a lot of misunderstandings, like the mayor said earlier, where, we might do something that the community is upset about, but they just don't understand why we did it. And so we have a conversation and like, okay, that makes sense. So I think, conversation as to why we do things will help. I mentioned earlier that we are going to start these conversations on social media, the 5 to 10 minute conversations, so that the youth can ask questions, and we can have, that quick conversation about why something's done. We'll have different topics that we talk about. We're also going to have a community safety academy. We've been having community safety academies for the general public, but we're going to have one specifically youth focused, so that youth could come in and learn about the police department. And then we want to continue having the Know Your Rights seminar, so that youth know how to interact with police and know their rights when a police officer is contacting them.
All right, thank you for answering the question. And if Councilman Johnson or Mayor Butt wants to add on to that or anything, they're free to do that too.
I really can't say it better than Chief French did. I think that I think if people have issues with the police, they need to talk about it. And I think that that all of us, Councilmember Johnson, myself, Police Chief, we're all available to talk to anybody about issues they have at any time. And if people aren't talking to us, we don't understand what the problems are. So again, I think communication and transparency and being available is really important.
And just to build on what the other speakers have stated, for youth who have issues with the police, or for anybody who has issues with the police, state your issue. We won't know, we can't solve the issue, or the police can't begin to address the issue, or the community can't begin to address the issue unless we know what's going on. If you don't feel comfortable stating it to law enforcement, please, my number and my email is all around the city. Let me know, and I'll be more than happy to facilitate a conversation or get information to help you, become more comfortable, or, get a better understanding of what it is that you're uneasy about. And so, once again, I concur with the previous speakers. And if anyone has an issue with law enforcement, or, doesn't feel comfortable reaching out to law enforcement, I don't mind, once again, acting as that middleman, that resource to help you feel more comfortable living in your city.
There's also an additional resource, which is the Community Police Review Commission, which Mayor Butt mentioned earlier. And it's an independent board that does investigations if there's a complaint on the police department. So it's separate and apart from the police department. It is citizen-led, and so they can investigate complaints also.
Thank you to all of our panelists for this section. Now I'll be handing it over to Ashley to lead our next section.
Hello, everyone. I want to say thank you to all the panelists that came tonight and even took the time to have this conversation with us and to participate. I do want to start with saying all panelists, please turn their camera on. We're now going into the solution section, and we all will be a part of this conversation. I want to say that this part of the town hall, I just want to say, we'll give a little background on it. This is for us to have this conversation. Everybody has echoed that it's important for us to have these conversations and for all of us to meet in the middle to discuss this work. So I want to give the RYC a chance to have this seat at the table to speak, but then also the audience. So as we've seen, there is a lack of accountability with some situations and some issues that occur within the education system. There's a lack of supporting the youth and our voice in the representation of youth in many different programs, and just a lack of representation of BIPOC students within school curriculum. So we want to open it up to the audience, but also ROIC and also the panelists to have this discussion on how do we move forward to tackle these issues, but then to also make sure that the youth have a voice at the table within power to be a part of the solution, but also the implementation. So any of the Richmond City Youth Council members want to ask a question, propose a solution, propose a topic, here's your time to, take the floor.
Yes, Ashley, I would like to direct this to all of our educators and board members. So all the teachers and educators here essentially stated that of an idea that they want to push a new generation of teachers and students. What steps do you believe need to be taken starting today to either at an institutional level or at a district level in order to start this push? And what exactly does this push look like to each and every one of you?
I will start. So at the school district, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the school board actually is the final say on who gets hired in the district for every position, from the janitor to the superintendent and everything in between. So there are a couple of things, though, that I think that we can do to increase the diversity of our staff. And I think that's really what you're getting at, is that okay. So one, I'm going to borrow an idea because I think it is a very good idea, and it's an idea from Trustee Consuela Lara. And her idea is to actually create a teacher academy in our schools. So youth who are interested in going into the teaching profession, just like we have a law academy and a tech academy, but a teaching academy. So youth who are interested in going into teaching in high school could be part of this teaching academy. And so they could get on their way to becoming teachers. And then the idea is when they go off to college and get their certificates, that they're able to come back here because we've already given them, the first leg up towards becoming teachers. So that's one. The other thing is we really need to expand our recruitment practices to make sure that we're going to places. Here is one, but there are other places, in California, in the nation, that are similar to Richmond, that has similar demographics. And we need to go to those places, and we need to go to the San Antonios and to the Atlantas and to the DCs and to the Bostons and recruit from colleges that serve students that look like us. We need to make a very proactive effort to do that. And those are things that can actually be done to help diversify our staff.
I think it's also important to involve our students, and it's up to us, the educators, to encourage and support our students to also become leaders. If you look at the leaders that are running the district, they don't mirror our communities. The majority of our communities are Latino and African American, and we are few and far between in leadership positions. And that worries me because those are the people that are actually making the decisions that impact every single one of our children. And this is not to say that people of color are the best educators. We have amazing white allies, but it is important that we recognize that in order to then try to find solutions for it. And so developing you all as our next leaders to be running our school districts in the state is really where I think we need to emphasize your collaborative power.
I'll build off those because those were actually the two things I was writing down, was around recruiting and retaining, and then also around listening to youth. So I'm just going to elaborate on what y'all stated. Back to what Board Member Phillips was saying, I think that our recruitment process needs to be part of it, but also important is the retaining. I would love to see it actually be a monetary, like incentivized to have teachers of color. I know that there's many steps that would need to go through, union, et cetera. But as a white person, so much of my learning about race and identity has come from people of color. And there is a massive amount of extra work, extra energy, extra emotion that I believe our Black and Brown educators in particular are holding in this space, and in particular our Black educators. I think that there's huge value. There's so many research studies, but I don't think we even need the research to see the difference. I'll speak just at Kennedy. In the last few years, had a great conversation with a teacher a couple years ago who was the only young male of color teacher. And just the number of students outside of his classroom who he was like their closest person at the school was astounding. Right. And that, what does that look like for us to put value in that and to on a systemic, like structural level within the school? So that's just one piece of that direction. I know I'm talking long, but with empowering youth, I think that what we need to do is it's not so much about empowering, because youth have the power, but it's about us adults moderating our power, right? Like checking ourselves for how often we speak before we listen, for how often we're the only ones in the room making a decision about all the youth, right? All of those ways, I think, are things that we need to do. And I think what youth are looking for are not just to be asked, but they want to see that when we listen, like that we act on it and things happen. Like they're not about wasting their time and telling you what they want to see when they know you're not going to do anything about it. So like we kind of have to prove ourselves first. And I think they've told us enough that we can start moving on. So there's a lot we could go into with that, but I think that's the push and that's the change, is like listening and acting on what you say. I want a youth person in our ILT, our instructional leadership team. I want a youth person, all these different committees that are making decisions about youth. We need them. And when we also benefit from their labor, we need to have ways to compensate and honor them for that as well, right? So I think we got to be at real talk about what the costs are, and making sure that we're not just aligning it where all the costs are continually being shouldered by our Black and Brown students and colleagues.
And I'm just going to add to that, recruitment, retaining. I'm going to add support to this, because all new educators need support. Educators that have been teaching and are new to the district need support. So with that being said, as far as the effects on the youth need to be able to be blessed to have that teacher they met freshman year and see them senior year. And that teacher should be there during that whole time. But meanwhile, what may happen during that time is that teacher may move because there's something with the salary, or there may be an issue, or worse yet, a letter of non-reelect at the hands of a systemic thought, or at the hands of someone who just has an axe grant at the hands of it, because you just get let go just for the sake of it. And that educator may not have in time to explain to the students at that point, or even focus finishing the school year, because they have to deal with that letter of non-reelect, which also affects our teachers of color, especially our Black educators in districts, not just here, but elsewhere as well. So I think as far as building the trust within the youth, we need stability. Like if you have a student and you see them freshman year, that student should be able to see that teacher senior year when they graduate. And they should be able to keep in touch with that teacher after they graduate, when they go off to college, or if they go off to vocational school, they go off to get on with their life. When they come back to visit, they should be able to see their same teacher and say, hi, here's what I'm doing with my life. Thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to share, regardless of your teacher, just how you feel as an individual about this whole situation? As a parent, how do you feel our educational system is interacting with our BIPOC youth?
I can, as a parent, and my son's sitting right here, and I'm specifically talking about my son because He's one that hates school. He's hated school since day one. And he regularly tells me who his favorite teacher was. And that was his second grade teacher, who was an African-American man. And he's shaking his head right now. He's like, yep. And that's important. It's somebody that he, it's representative of him being older. And so that's so important. And we have to have people that, just like when I became chief, it was important when young girls come up to me, they're like, I've never seen a Black female police officer. You have to have people that you can see yourself as. And so representation matters, I guess, is my point.
Okay, if everyone is finished with their own input, I'd like to ask a question to the Richmond City Council. On July 28th, 2020, the Richmond Youth Council, we proposed a resolution before the city and you all adopted it. Resolution number 8820, I think, in support of the youth in our efforts to increase anti-racism programs and projects in the community, public safety throughout the West Contra Costa Unified School District. And we want to have a follow-up on that and want to ask how you are going to commit to supporting us with that.
What's the program again? Could you remind me one more time? The subject of the resolution?
To increase anti-racism programs and projects in the community.
Well, I know, I'm sorry, Tom, were you going to answer?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I know one thing that we can most definitely do to help support that resolution, and I see Trina is on this call. Trina is the lead of our GARE team for the city of Richmond. And one thing we can most definitely do is make sure that the two are partnering and working with each other. So that way the youth has a voice in how we're going about racial equity in the city of Richmond. Seeing as though you guys are the future, you're the future of this city. So that's one of the main components that I could see the city council better supporting what the youth has going on in terms of making the city more equitable and inclusionary. And then also creating a greater partnership with the school board. Finding some type of way for us to formally meet, saying as though we serve the same constituency, and saying, making sure that there's consistency. Mr. Wilson talked about consistency in teachers, making sure there's some type of consistency in policy as well. So when the students leave the schools, they also enter a community that's also reflective of what they just learned.
Yeah, I want to make the same pitch for the GARE program. It's a program that involves all city employees, and its main objective is to work through racial inequalities and promote equity. And there are a lot of people. There are a large number of people who are city employees who are working through this program, and it's really important, and I think it's very fruitful. I was just looking at the last announcement I got. Some of the programs are that the city's working on are 8 ways to approach racial equity at work. How should you be talking with employees about racism? Confronting racism at work, a reading list. The characteristics of white supremacy culture, and so on. So this is really a great program, and it's really a good thing that it's come to Richmond, and so many of our city employees are involved in it.
Okay, if everyone's done answering that question, we have a question in the chat from Willie. Is there a conversation between the school district and the Richmond Police Department in regards to the suspension of the funding of SROs on school sites? And if we could make this a little brief, that'd be nice. Thank you.
I'll be very brief. I have had a couple conversations with the with the superintendent, but as was stated before, the resolution is pretty clear that folks don't want SROs on school campuses. So we have to figure out a different way to do things.
I'm going to chime in on that one as well. So as I said earlier, the SRO program was defunded for this year. Now, what does that really mean when nobody's at school? Nobody's at campus, right? So I don't know that it really means anything, to be honest with you, to defund a program when nobody's at school. I hate to put it that way, but that's the truth. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we keep our children safe while they're on campus. And at this point, what we have done is made a decision not to have SROs, but we did not have a plan, a new safety plan. And in order for us to go back to school with this resolution still in place, we're going to have a safety plan, a new one that is robust and that works. And if we don't have that, I know this is going to make some people upset, but you might see SROs because we cannot be in a situation where we eliminate something and then don't build a plan around it. I think that we really need to spend time building out our CSOs, the Campus Safety Officer Program, professionalizing that to make sure that we have a secure force within the district to keep our kids safe. But then the other thing is this, and this is just a fact. You all know that the school district recently has split up into wards or districts, and there's 5 different districts. And those 5 different districts are spread out over 5 different cities. You have everything in it from El Cerrito all the way to Hercules. And where I am thinking, or where my thought is, and this is not something that I've shared with the rest of the school board yet, is that all of those communities are different, and they all have different needs. They all have different wants. I think that's extremely important to make sure that the school district has a good relationship with the police departments throughout the district, because you just have to have that kind of relationship. But I think it should be up to each ward, to be frank, to determine what the level of involvement is that they have with their local police departments. Because the truth of the matter is, if you live in Pinole and you want something in Pinole, people who live in a different ward in El Cerrito shouldn't be able to tell you in Pinole that you can't have something that your community wants. And that's the reason that we split up into these wards anyway, which is to give greater representation to those specific areas. So we could end up in a situation where things look different in different wards. So if there's, Ward A, I'm not going to say a number because I don't want to identify a specific ward, but if Ward A, doesn't want to have any involvement with police officers, for me, I'd leave it up to the trustee of that ward. And if Ward B, if that ward wants to have involvement, I'd leave it up to them, because that's the whole point of moving to district elections, especially when you cross over 5 cities. It's not a one size fit all. So that's the point that I wanted to share.
I would ask, how is it that we can involve our youth in those kinds of solutions meetings? Because ultimately, they're the ones, mostly they're in middle school and high school, but they're the ones who also are going to be impacted, I think, the most. And the way they see themselves on a campus with a police officer, it's really important that we hear what it is that they would want in order to feel safe on a campus.
Yeah, I just want to add to this. I think, so for myself, I know I've stated it at board meetings and other meetings that I am a person who does not believe that there need to be police in schools. And I believe in student safety. Like that is not those have to go. As I mentioned earlier, no matter what my thoughts are, my responsibility, right, is to the community that I serve, and the safety of the students is paramount in that. So at no point can that be sacrificed for even an end that I might deeply believe in, right? So I think what what I want to echo from what Mr. Phillips says is just the urgency of this. Something I was really impressed by a group that Councilmember Johnson mentioned earlier, Richmond Revolution. Pretty soon after this resolution passed, they hosted a series of community dialogues once a week where they had different constituents and community stakeholders come together to discuss the question, like, what does school safety look like without police, basically? And so there was one where it was students, one where it was parents, one where it was like mental health professionals. There were campus safety workers, there were educators, and there was like community-based organizations. And I'm not saying those notes specifically are what we look to, but like I think that process, right, is the kind of thing that we need to have moving us forward. Like there has to be, I think what a lot of community felt who disagreed with the process this summer was that they weren't involved, right? That was a like expressed and felt need. So I think the urgency piece is huge. I know this year is crazy and there's a billion things on our plates. And so like, I get it that this hasn't been the focus of the conversation, but I am 100% like, yeah, we don't have what we need to return back with what a full plan looks like. And for someone who takes responsibility over young people, that's huge. That's urgent. And so I think there's what we unite on, right? No matter your opinion, what we unite on is the well-being of our young people. And I think that has to be the central component. And we have to be really clear about what safety encompasses. Because I think the other thing that I felt pretty deeply is that a lot of times it can get reduced to only physical safety. And I'm not dismissing physical safety, but like if we're not talking about like emotional safety, like what it means from a mental component, like what it means from all of these things, that's where a lot of my personal beliefs come from, right? I would love to have a social worker at Kennedy. I think that would be really important. We don't have that role. And our SRO is amazing. I cannot speak more about her. And she was feeding the snacks, the everything, the mentoring. And I think about like, are there ways to have that mentoring and other things filled by a different role that doesn't have some of the other things that come with it? So that's where my thoughts come from. And it's a deep issue. And it's an issue that draws on like fear and just like personal experiences that people have had in a really deep way. So I think we can't be fast about it. So I am also worried by the pace that this conversation is going, because we're about to enter the new year and, you know, we're starting our planning. I know Ms. Crespo knows, like planning has started for next year. So we got to get on it. I stick with what my thoughts are and what my position is. And for my position to be true and me to stay with those same beliefs, there has to be things in place to make sure kids are good. Bottom line.
And I just want to just piggyback on one thing that Ms. Burke said just now is after, and I voted for this resolution, by the way, but after it was over, there was this immediate question and it's what are we going to do differently? Because in order for this resolution to actually be implemented, and it's not implemented now because nobody's at school, right? So, but in order for it to be implemented, we actually have to have something in place. You know, I have 4 children, and I firmly believe that, you know, when we send our kids to school, and I say we because my kids go to district schools, when we send our kids to school, there are 2 things that we want. We want our kids to come back the way we left them. You know, we want them to come back safe, and we want you to teach them. There's 2 things we want, right? And so everything else is secondary to keeping children safe and to teaching them. And it doesn't mean, and I'm not trying to imply it has to look exactly like it did before. And I'm not even implying that it has to be SROs. But what I am saying is it has to be something, because it's not okay to just send kids into an environment without a plan to actually keep them safe. Because as soon as something happens, people are going to ask the right question is, well, I'm glad that you led with your heart. I'm glad that you were passionate. I'm glad that you tried to address a social justice issue, but you were supposed to keep my kids safe. And so we have to put something in place to do that. And if we don't, like I said, you may see them back, or you may see them back in some spaces, because again, you know, we're broken out into 5 wards and over 5 cities. There's like 250,000 people, you know, in the West Contra Costa Unified School District. And they all have very different views around physical police officers, at school. So there's a larger conversation that has to happen, but it has to happen, or we can't go through with this plan.
Well, I'd like to key off on some of the things that Mr. Phillips brought up, and that is the lack of a plan. I obviously come from a different generation. When I graduated from high school, the number one song was Chubby Checker and the Twist, right? So I go way back. And where I went to school, we didn't have police officers. No, it was something nobody even thought about. The closest thing we had were students who were part of the safety patrol and went out and put flags out on the street so people could cross the street and stop traffic. So we know that there was a time and there was a place where we didn't need police officers in the schools. But obviously, we're in a different place and a different time now. When I first came to Richmond and when my kids were in school, the school district ran their own police department, and they were kind of the laughing stock. I don't know where they got their police cars, but they bought them from some police car used car lot. They were always, pieces were falling off and that kind of thing, and kids made fun of them. But they did that for a number of years, and it didn't have anything to do with the Richmond with the city police departments. That nobody thought about that. It was the district's own police department. And I guess at some point the board figured out that wasn't working, so they looked at another model, and that was bringing police from the various local police departments into the schools. And that's the model we've seen for probably the last 20 years, maybe more, 30. And then at some point, people decided that wasn't a good idea, and so we got rid of it. But I'm really curious to see, what's going to come up next. And this is a place that I would like to turn the tables and ask some of the young people on this panel about what they would do. Would they figure that it's not a problem? We don't need this kind of presence in our school, or are there still issues that need to be dealt with? And if so, who's going to deal with them? And I think maybe the young people in the schools are in the best position to tell us what will work, because they're there, and they're the people who who are either going to benefit or not benefit from this. And I don't know, can we turn the tables and ask some of them to tell us, what would they like to do? I'd really like to hear
it. RYC don't all speak at once. I think I'll take that for the first little go round. I personally am not within West Contra Unified School District. I am a college student. I go to Mills College. I major in education, so I'm on the path of becoming a teacher. But I have a niece that is within the school district, and I think me and her have had conversations with police officers being on campus, and she has spoken to me that she's uncomfortable, but she doesn't really know how to approach a teacher on speaking on this uncomfortability and what do we do when she is uncomfortable, because she does suffer from anxiety and she can have a panic attack, and she has had a panic attack within the classroom with police presence on campus. So I don't fully think I really know how she would want to see that conversation addressed, but I think it's not something that I can speak for my own stuff that I would want my niece around. I think there's different ways to provide safety in having an armed police officer within campus, because I went to Berkeley High, and that's what we had walking around, and it made a lot of us highly uncomfortable and didn't know really what to do with situations. If you've seen a police officer, and there was many incidents where those officers abused their power and put kids within situations that they shouldn't have been in. And I just think that's not the right way to go about it. There's many different ways that I personally don't know those ways, but I think there's different ways that we can address safety within a school without having an armed police officer on campus?
I think so. I go to El Cerrito High School, which is in which is in the district, and I think I have a very different view than many youth in our district, because I feel like I honestly have never had a problem with the police officers that were at our school. Like, I never felt uncomfortable. But then again, that's just me. I'm just speaking from my own experience. I think as far as the SROs and just like the campus security at our school, they're really friendly. And from what I know, at least, I don't think they have abused their power at all. But then again, I'm one person out of like, I'm not sure how many students there are, but there's like 1,000, like I think 1,200 around that. There's a lot of students.
1,500.
Yeah, so there's 1,600, and I'm only one person, so I can't speak for everyone. But I would like to make my peers comfortable, and I know a lot of them aren't comfortable with police officers at the school. So I think there needs to be a conversation on what an alternative to a police officer can be.
I'd like to add on what Kashaf says. I'm also a student at El Cerrito High, and even if my own experience with police on campus is a positive one, that does not speak on behalf of the entire West Contra Costa Unified School District. There are several schools encompassing our entire district, and when we establish a plan, we have to keep in mind the perspectives of every single student, and I think that's really crucial.
You know, it's really interesting to hear this this dialogue, right? And Mayor Butt, thank you for starting this dialogue. So, like, we've had, you know, 3 young people just now tell their stories, you know, and Miss Davis talked about, I think it was her niece or her sister, but then the rest of you talked about your own experiences, right? And out of those, it's not just you know, adults or older people who have different experiences around, you know, police officers, whether they're on campus or elsewhere. It's the same thing with youth, right? And so, just in this conversation here, the majority of people who expressed what their own experience was actually positive, right? And I get it when you say that, you know, my personal experience doesn't mean that everyone else has had the same experience, but we have like almost 29,000 students. So to get a real snapshot of what each person's experience is, if I was to bet you a sandwich, because I can't bet anything other than a sandwich. I don't have enough money to bet anything other than a sandwich. But if I was to bet you a sandwich, out of that 29,000, I don't think the majority would say that they've had negative experiences. And so I think what we have to do is, when we have the conversations, just be open and honest. We will all have had different experiences. We will all have come from different places. I'm a lawyer. I've actually sued police officers for misconduct. So I know some of them do things that they have absolutely no business doing. At the same time, both of my parents were police officers. And I have spent a lifetime around people, police officers, who have done the right thing. It's a mixed bag, just like, you know, with everything else. But I think one of the things that would be helpful for the district is, if we actually did have them, is if they had more accountability. And this is more of an issue for Mayor Butt and for Police Chief French, more accountability to actually the district, if they're contracting with the district, if they're working with the district, because the way it's set up right now is they don't actually report to the district. They report to their departments, but they're working on the campus. And so you can see how that could cause some conflict, because if there's a way that the district wants things to be done or to be done differently, well, you know, hey, I don't report to you, I report to, you know, the police department. So there are definitely things that could be and should be changed if that relationship was to continue, because you can't have people on campus working there who don't report to the school district. You can't do that. No one would have somebody working in their space that reports to somebody else. So I'll leave that there. But thank you for sharing, because it's really interesting to hear the diversity of opinions, even within the young people.
Well, this is a great conversation. You know, Mr. said, I'm
share.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think Osmar was going to share. I saw you unmute earlier. And I mean, I always have something to say, but I'm.
Yeah, I was just gonna like share my experience. So I've had the opportunity and quite frankly the luck of being able to go to private schools from K to 12 where I am now. And in my time there has never been like a opportunity to not think about college or not think about education. For us growing up, college was not the end goal. There was always like opportunities to pursue masters or PhDs or just go like the end goal was always to go to college. It was never community, there was never vocational schools, and there was such a negative stigma around going and getting a job right after high school or not even completing high school. And I think that in a way that's benefited so many students that I know because it has pushed them to really succeed. But at the same time, I also know that the reason why so many of these students are pushed to succeed is just because there's such a larger amount of resources and just funding available to private schools as opposed to public schools. So how does the West Contra Costa Unified School District and how are teachers, what are you guys planning on and what do you feel would be the best way to try and inspire students to really love education again? And what do you want to see from the school district to help give you these tools to make sure that every student loves to go to school, wakes up every morning and is excited to go and is thinking of college as the next step in his life, not some unobtainable, unreachable goal?
You've actually touched on a very good point. I'm glad you said that. I think from my end is, this is how I see it. I've always wanted to teach since I was little. And ever since I've come up, I've had people tell me that you're not ready to teach. So when are you ready to teach? So let's start with that. I've had people say, why do you want to do that? You're not going to make that much money. Or why do you want to do that? You want to work with these kids? Are you serious? So here's how I see it. If you have enough people on a school campus that are excited about molding, shaping young minds, then that's your end. If you have educators that are excited and realize, oh, that lesson plan, that was garbage. Let me fix this. If you have individuals on the campus that are just motivated and are not set in their ways and just willing to make change, willing to accept failure, willing to continue to build and change what they're teaching, even how they're teaching. So, I mean, even without distance learning, I would probably be teaching differently than I did last year and the year before that and the year before that. So be prepared to tailor make your teaching to your class environment, because you get a different group of students every year. You get different kinds of students every year. You may have the quiet class. You may have the, students that are bouncing up the walls. You may have that class. You may have the one class, like they come in the door and they may not be motivated and you really spend the whole year just being a cheerleader. So I think that has to be part of it too. And just if students get, I'm sure all of our young leaders on this panel right now can tell when the educator is not feeling it. Either they're not feeling it because it's that kind of day, or they're not feeling because like, I'm just going to be here for 2 years and then I'm going to go elsewhere. Like this is a job. This is a stop on a road. This is a notch, over here that I'm just doing now just to pass time before I do what I really want to do. You can see that. And that also, that hurts the students, but the fact that students recognize that, that's a big deal. So I would say just, put education and just focus on the value of it. So you have I have a lot of students that say well, I want to work. I need to make money. I said, okay, but you got to understand something. Do you want to keep working, or do you want to have us be in a situation where folks can work for you, or you can own your own business, or you can work for yourself? You can set your own schedule. instead of just be at the mercy of someone like, literally just like clocking in and out, like all that, like, you have to think about like how you want to build that and just start thinking about goals, like where you want to, that's an interview question. If you apply for a job, that's a question I'll ask you. They may ask you for that on a scholarship. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What is the goal you want to obtain? Where do you want to be? And so if you ask a senior that, they don't know. I mean, I was that senior in high school. I had an idea, but my problem was I knew I wanted to teach, and I let folks kind of steer me out of that. Luckily, went back to college and pressured through, and here's where I am right now. So I just think just to make it education exciting and just not make it so, because sometimes it gets a little, dry when you start talking about standards and you start talking about all this jargon that we educators use in meetings, and we start saying this during class. But I think at the end of the day, we are responsible for just bringing, it's going to sound a little corny, but we got to put a little sunshine in the room, especially when we have classrooms, no windows.
If I can add a little bit to that, I know like Mr. Sado spoke about the educational component, but I think what the real difference in private school and public school is that, a lot of parents are obviously invested in your education when you go to private school. And my daughter and Osmar went to school together. So, we're invested. And in public school, you don't have as much. There's a lot of parents that are invested, but some aren't. And you have a lot of traumas that kids are experiencing in the communities, and all of those things that they're bringing to school with them prevent them from being, as involved and engaged as they should be. And so we have to address some of those community and societal and economic issues going on in our community so that we can let kids be kids and let kids focus on actual learning, as opposed to being worried about who got shot outside their house last night, or, my mom didn't come home last night. So we have to start working and investing in our young kids. And that's at the elementary school age, when you don't see a kid come to school, or you see a kid come to school and he's hungry every day. Or, I'm working on a program where we can notify schools when we come into contact with a young kid that has experienced trauma, that we can send a notification to that school to say, you need to handle this student with care. Of course, we can't divulge the information, but we can say this young person was involved in something. And so if they're acting, a certain way, or, disconnected, please just handle them with care. And so we have to address those societal issues so that we can allow kids to go back to being kids.
And I also like to take a stab at answering the question. And I know I was invited as a council member. However, I would like to speak for a moment from my experience as a community worker at Richmond High School. And I've seen kids most excited to come to school when it was relevant to them. Whether that's when the academic and curriculum is relevant, or whether it's the social emotional support that's relevant and allows them to thrive and grow. And so I think it's very important that we make them see their strengths, help them like grow their strengths in schools, as well as see the relevancy and like, why am I here? You mentioned earlier, Mr. Wilson, like students often ask like, why are we doing this? Or what is the point of this? If we can really help them understand like why the academics are relevant and make the academics relevant, not just lie on a racist curriculum, but actually make the curriculum relevant, and then also have relevant social emotional support in that place, then our schools, which are really supposed to be like academic centers where people can not just grow like intellectually, but grow emotionally, grow in their character, and grow like who they are as a person, then I think we can really see people more excited about going there, because it's not just a place to go to read a book. It becomes a place to go to discover who you are and more about yourself, and with greater support. And I think that's one of the biggest ways to make school an exciting place and education an exciting place for students, especially Black, Indigenous, and students of color to be.
I'll add my own little 2 cents. At school, I often, sorry, my dogs, but I always say that whatever I expect for my daughter is what I expect for all of my students. And I think that as a parent, I really think about the fact that I expect my daughter, July, will go to a four-year college. She'll go get her master's, she'll go get her doctorate. And we should have that expectation of all of our kids. We're focusing on our new vision, and it's that we're going to have students be college ready, because then they can choose to go through whatever door they want. Sometimes I see when we use the term college and career ready, that career aspect, there's nothing wrong with going straight into a career, but it's kind of used as a loophole to say, well, we're going to kind of track our kids to go into that career path because we're not going to hold those high expectations. And that's just another form of racism. So I really think that it's important that we really call things out when we see them. And I also wonder, we invested so much time and got, feedback on safety on campus and the SRO issue. Imagine safety in classrooms. There are kids who don't feel safe in classrooms, and that culture is created not only by our students, but by our teachers as well. If they don't identify with the teachers there, if the teacher doesn't have an open mindset to all of our children, that creates a very unsafe environment. And I mean, I have kids that will wander because they don't want to go to that second block class, right? And it's sad that where do we begin to address those kinds of issues too? We need to support our teaching staff. We need to ensure that we have, accountability there as well. I mean, that goes with our leaders as well, right? Like I need to be just as accountable as my teachers are, but it's important that we begin to have those conversations, because that's sometimes where a lot of the damage for our kids who don't want to go to school. And it happens, I'm in high school, it happens K-8, where kids have already been disenfranchised and they hate school because as little ones, like in K-8, that to me is a disservice. And I'm very passionate about what I do, because I believe every child has the ability, but it's in our hands. And how dare us throw away that opportunity, right? Like just say, you weren't worth it. Oh, if anybody said that about my daughter, and if anybody said that about any of our kids, right? Like as parents, we would not be okay with it. So why is it that we allow others to say that about the kids that are in front of us at our school? 1,600 beautiful souls, and you all can, reach what you want with us supporting and guiding you, but also believing in you.
Ms. Crespo, just what you said is so true. And what I have told parents, is like every child, when they go to school, like they have this fire in them and they have this light in them. And what I've said about my own kids, is I'm not going to let anybody put my baby's light out, and I will tell another parent, don't let anybody put your baby's light out. And so the issue though is, who is going to put their light out? Right? Because we're sending our kids to school and we're saying, don't put my baby's light out. So what we're really saying is that there are people on our campuses who are extinguishing the fire inside of our children. And see, we can't really talk about reforming our system. We can't really talk about letting our children have a chance to get ahead in life without talking about how the adults on our campuses are interacting with them. And that's the teachers. Now there's classified people and there are principals and whatnot, but it's the teachers. And so if we are ever going to have an honest conversation about what's happening to these kids, it's the people who are teaching them putting their lights out, extinguishing their flames, their fires. And that's not okay. And so if we're a family, and we should be, this should be the WCCUSD family. If we are a family and we have people who are not doing what they're supposed to do, and we do, people who see that, they have to say something. If you see something, and this is for any staff person, any teacher, any classified person, any principal, if you see somebody mistreating a child, say something. Because if you don't, it's going to continue to happen. And that is one of the biggest problems. And we got officers on this line too. If you see somebody mistreating somebody out in the street, say something, because you're not a good cop if you watch a bad cop do something wrong and don't say anything. You're not a good educator if you watch a bad educator do something wrong and don't say anything. And those are the kind of conversations that we have to have, and have it truthfully and authentically with our whole self if we're actually going to change something in this district.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at Helen, because we do say stuff. We do talk, right? And then here we are. That's sometimes I'm like, man, am I going to get fired this week because I'm talking too much? But it's I talk. And now where's the action is what we need to get at, right? Because like you said, these are our babies, and having a baby, I only have one daughter, but it has changed the way I see my role in education, because I see everybody as like, a cute little 7-year-old. It's like amazing, because that fire, like you said, is in all of our kids, and along the K-12 system, we do extinguish that fire. And I love the way that you said that, Mr. Phillips. It's saddening, because little ones shouldn't be subjected to that. We should keep that little life and fire alive as long as we can. They'll get to be adults out there, and it's a crappy world for a lot of our Black and brown kids. But God, as K-12, let's like build their wings and let them fly through the door that they want to. That's always been my goal in education.
Yes.
Yes. And then also, like, all of this, I agree with all of this. I'm just going to add to that, it is also the educator's responsibility, as we right now going through race and equity meetings, that we do need to reconnect with that. You need to be mindful what you say to a kid. You need to be mindful, because someone could say something to a second grader and that will stay with them for life. And that will scar them. And that would, so when I taught theater, I had a bunch of students, I'm pretty sure I had some students like, well, I did it in middle school where I tried this, and then my teacher said, I can't act, or I can't dance, or why are you doing this? You look silly. And then that just took everything away. So I think that's something else, that's conversations that need to be added amongst staff at all sites. Like, talk about their interests. Like, if they have an interest in whatever they're interested in, support it. Like, that's how you create dialogue, and that's how you build relationships with your students.
Thank you for this conversation. We really do appreciate this conversation and the dialogue that is happening. But I do want to pass it to Mian to do the closing statements and our question that we would like to propose before we leave.
Okay, thank you for your time. But before we leave, the Richmond Youth Council wants to ask one thing. Starting today, what steps will you be willing to take together to ensure success within each institution? The Richmond Youth Council is asking if you'd be willing to commit to moving forward, all work together, and establish a program and timeline that looks at racial bias training for teachers within schools and supporting BIPOC youth.
I'm going to be connecting with Mr. Phillips, and I know Helen probably will too, because I think there's a lot from what you said today, and the conversation that we had, that we really can move this work forward. Again, I hope I don't get fired next week for what I said, but it's really important that we are able to have honest conversations about this, because I'm not saying anything that isn't a fact. Some people may not like to hear it, but again, these are our kids, 29,000 of them in WCC USD. You all deserve everything.
Here. I'll go next, and I'm gonna slightly squeeze in what I was gonna say, but it aligns to the question. So basically, I was just gonna speak as a white educator, because there's a lot of us in this district. And there's a lot that I'm not separating myself, we need to work on. So thank you for asking about racial bias training. There is different elements of that I think individual sites have done, individual whatever have done, but it looks very different. So I'm curious to hear what type of program people are interested in. But what I have experienced more in this district from my fellow white educators is this sense of, I think what I called it was how do you tell woke people that they're sleepwalking? That in words alone and talking the talk, people are really good at talking the talk and saying, yes, I'm here for this. This is why I teach in this district, right? I could teach there's a lot of white savior complex stuff going on. So it's not just, I think it's yes, it's bias training, but it's also bigger and deeper than that, right? Because of what are white educators getting out of this current system and of their role? And I think that there's a huge amount of figuring out what are the expectations that we hold for our students? Are they the same that we hold for our own children? Does our expectation of them go as far as graduation, or does it go farther than that? That's what I was going to talk more about earlier, but I know we got a lot of brilliant people who need to speak, but I will speak for myself that I need to do better. Just today, I was grateful to be called out. I don't always respond gratefully in the moment, but I was checked on something and I needed to be checked on it. And I was grateful to have like a deep enough relationship with the teacher that like we could have that conversation. But that needs to be the norm. Like, I'm sure I'm doing way more than I'm getting called out on for myself, right? But I'm just saying it's a fostering a community of like humility and honesty, and that it's just not about us. And I think we make it about us a lot. So yes, to the training.
So I'm looking in the remarks in the chat, and it says to clarify, we want to collaborate with the different entities within Richmond and Richmond City Youth Council. So is this question more along how to bring the youth council and the school district and the city all to kind of together to work on things?
That was
Okay.
the question that was being asked.
Okay, so as I was sitting here thinking about this, we have the Richmond Youth Council for the city. The school district also has a youth commission, okay? And what I think would be magical, right, is if the youth council and the youth commission, so the council for the city and the commission for the district, actually began to have some joint meetings, right? So we can have cross collaboration between the two. Right. And then what we can do, and we don't do this enough, but the city and the city council and the school district would have joint meetings occasionally. We need to get back to having joint meetings. All right. And then what we can do, though, is we can have the youth commission and the youth council work together, collaborate together, and then have a joint meeting with the board and the city council. Right. This is something, and I can't commit. I'm sorry, Mayor, but I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm not on the city council. I'm sorry, Councilman Johnson, because I'm just running my mouth now. Like, what the heck? I almost cussed. What is he talking about? But there's a space where we can bring the respective youth councils together from the city and the school district, where they could begin to work on joint issues, right? And then we could have joint meetings where it's the council, the board, and the two respective youth councils where we're actually working through things. And if you guys, as the young people or younger people, actually come up with, right, a list of things that you want to do, right, jointly, and this is where the power is, jointly come up with a list of things that you want to do. And then you could present those things, right, to the district and to the city council in unison, right? And we could figure out where we could actually work together to get some of these things done, because the problem is we're so disjointed. But we don't have to be. And I really, if you want to, I mean, I will connect you all with the youth commission for the school district, and you could get to work.
And Mr. Phillips, Board Member Phillips, you're not speaking out of turn. I was we speaking straight from the same mindset. I really do believe that type of collaboration is the only way we can truly be about what we're talking about. And I would even, just to take it a step further, for cities that don't have youth councils, I would encourage those cities to also form youth councils, so that way their youth can be heard in what's going on in their city government, because what's going on in Richmond is completely different than what's going on in Panola. And I know you made that point earlier as well, Mr. Phillips. And we want to make sure that, although they have representation on the school commission, that they also have representation coming from their city as well. Because if you're on the school commission and you're presenting to the Richmond City Council, we can only make a phone call. But we most definitely want to make sure that other council members, like as Mr. mentioned, our school district spans throughout 5 different municipalities. We want to make sure that your voices are heard in every one of those, not just in Richmond. And if I can use my position as a council member to encourage other council members in those municipalities to form these type of commissions, then please, let's do that as well. But Mr., like I said, we have the same thought, and you are not speaking out of turn. That most definitely needs to happen. And I'll be the first, Mr. Mayor, I'll sign up for that commission. No problem.
I also want to include Chief Bisa French within the conversation. I don't want it to just be the school district. It needs to be the community as a whole. So if you would like to add something, I want to give you the time to.
All right. So I am always looking at ways that I can connect with the youth. And
one of the things that I'm setting up is a Chiefs Advisory Board. So it'll be really nice if I can have a member from the Youth Council to be on my Youth Chiefs Advisory Board, so that you guys could report back, where we'll be talking about policies and procedures and things we're implementing around the police department. So I think that that will be a great way for us to continue to connect, and that for you guys to be involved.
I'm going to close with the same pitch I started with, and that is that if you're a young person and you're not happy with the way the adults are running the world, then you have the opportunity to kick them aside and do it yourself. You know, those of you who are already serving on the youth council in the city of Richmond, or on the youth commission in the school district, have already taken a step toward that kind of involvement. But I urge you to look further. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of 18-year-old school board members throughout the United States. To serve on a school board, you only have to be 18 years old. So there's no reason why somebody who's a senior in high school can't aspire to serve on a school board. And I urge you to do it. I mean, if you really want to make a difference, you need a vote. That's the ultimate power, is to have that vote. And I would just say go for it. You know, I've already talked about serving on city commissions and committees. I have the power to appoint you to those committees. And but don't stop there. Think about running for office while you're still young. You know, my council member Jocelyn here, I don't know how old he is, but he's 20 something, right? When he was elected to the city council, he was the high vote getter. And you know, how old were you? 25, 26?
I was 24 when I ran, and I turned 25 the very next day. So
there you go. You know, the mayor of Stockton, who unfortunately just got beat, but he'll be back. He was elected to the city council when he was 23 years old, and became mayor when he was 25, and made an international name for himself with some of the things he was doing. The youngest member of the California Assembly is an assembly person from San Jose, 25 years old. So if you're a young person, don't think that somehow you got to wait a decade or 2 decades or whatever to be in a position where you can change the world. Get out there and do it right now. You can do it. You can start right now. And you know, one advantage of doing it while you're young is you got all that energy. You know, us old guys, you know, we go to bed early and get up late, but you guys can work all night and doesn't bother you a bit. So that's my closing statement: is get out there, get involved, think about running for office, think about serving on boards and commissions, and make a difference. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Don't complain about it. Get out there and do it yourself.
Thank you very much, Mayor Butt. Does anyone have anything else to say before I make my closing statement?
I don't really have anything to add to this. Again, I just agree. Like I say, the more youth that are involved everywhere in the community, the better. But I will say this. I want you all to just keep thinking about the future. I'm still optimistic. I was optimistic when I was in high school. However, my first year right out of high school was when the Rodney King verdict happened. So I had this thing where I thought I would never see things that my parents saw when they were growing up. And it turns out I have, especially in this year alone. So even if that happens, just remain optimistic and just believe in change for the better. And that's all I got.
Sorry, just to quickly say something. I've loved the conversation that we've had today. I think it's really important for the youth and other people, I guess, like in power. I think it's nice to see that you all share a lot of similar thoughts with us. I think it's nice to kind of get that, I forgot the word, but it's just nice to get like Mr. Phillips, sorry, Council Member Phillips mentioned about school. I think a lot of younger people, like you'll say something to them and it kind of sticks with them. And I feel like a lot of adults don't really realize that, but it's really nice to see that a lot of the panelists actually agreed with that. So yeah, I'm just really happy that we were able to have this conversation, and thank you guys so much.
Yeah, again, I'd like to thank every single one of you, along with our audience members, every single one of our panelists, Mayor Butt, Chief French, Councilman Johnson, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Crespo, Ms. Burks, Board Member Phillips, and also special thank you to Richard Lee and KCRT TV for allowing us to host this webinar. And thank you to our staff liaison, Ms. Trina Jackson, and all of my council members for your hard work in organizing this town hall. This event wouldn't be possible without constant communication and collaboration from every single one of you. And I think this is just a step towards growth within our community and actually creating change. And we have a lot of work to do, and I'm looking forward to doing it with all of you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a beautiful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you all for the great talk.